Hello, everyone. You all nice and awake after lunch? Yeah? All right. I just want to take a moment and thank all of our sponsors who made this event possible. Anybody that's a sponsor in this room? Raise your hand if you are. Oh, really? Okay, come on. Usually there's sponsors in here. They're just being shy. But thank you. It takes a lot to put on an event like this, including our lovely tech team in the back there who was playing that amazing music. So to put us right to sleep before my talk. Thanks, guys. Just kidding. Their tracks are awesome. So this is Apps Are Making Us Dumber, a Cleaner Approach to UI. And I am Heather Wilde. And for those of you who don't know me, here's a little bit about me. I am the CTO of a company called Rocketeer. And through that, I also am working on I'm a fractional CTO for a couple of other companies, including one of my side projects called TWIP, Travel with Interesting People. We've won a lot of awards for that company, so it's pretty cool. You might as well look that up if you want to. I've had over 20 years of customer experience design, which means I am a lot older than I look. So I'm the advisory board chair of an engineering school in the U.S., one of our state colleges, UNLV. I'm also one of the only women to be an advisory board chair at an engineering school in the world, so I'm pretty proud of that one. And I've won lots of awards for my work, and I'm also the author of a column on Inc. and Forbes, so I'm responsible for a lot of clickbait that you see on the internet. You're welcome. So, first question is, how do we create a user interface, a UI? It gets down to really simple features. So you plan it, you think about what you want to do, then you design it and you test it. Simple, right? Well, it is when you think about it that way, but it comes down to really more steps than that. So the ideal UI for somebody, for any kind of thing, like an application that you're going to create, is these 4 phases. The adoption phase, the use phase, the transaction phase, and then the return phase. And what do I mean by that? Well, for adoption, you want to remove roadblocks for users. So you want to make sure that you're using like splash screens and tips and things like that to make sure that people are able to get into your application. And you want to have a clean home screen and good navigation so that they can get around, right? Because this is so that you can increase adoption, so that you can make sure that people actually are using it in the first place. And that your sign up and sign in is easy for them to use. I mean, if it's onerous for them to get into your application, they're not going to use it. So you failed at the first step. Make sense? Okay. The use phase is to make their decision simple. So now that you've got them in, you want them to actually use it. So the use phase is search. Like, are they actually going to search around the product? Are they gonna make some kind of action? Are they going to are they gonna buy something from you? Is there something about your service that they're gonna use? And are they going to be able to use it on different devices? So, for example, if you're a Facebook type app, like, can they access you from the phone, from the computer, from their watch? Where can they use you? If they can't use you, then, again, fail this step. Then transaction. So you want to make sure that for the user interface, it is convenient. So if you're selling them something, you need a basket for your product. So can things get into the cart easily? Like for Amazon, for example, I'm sure we all use Amazon for purchases. On their mobile app, you hit a button, it gives you a nice little force touch notification that the thing has gone into the cart, and it's in the cart. And then you can forget about it for days, come back, and the thing's still in the cart. So the basket notification is really easy for that. getting their address information as easily as possible. Like if you can pull it from somewhere, which is more difficult now, but still possible to know from the past. Like if you can fill things in because they're a previous user, that's useful. And then payment information and checkout and confirmation. This stage, as if you can make these things as simple as possible, then you're done. And then return. So here is the kicker, because it's okay, it's all well and good to have a well-designed app that people used once. But if you got them to come back, then you've got a unicorn on your hands. Because the more and more that you can get people to reuse your app, the more like daily active users or monthly active or weekly active users you can get, then you have something that is actually useful to people. So think about it this way. How many times a day do you look at Facebook or something similar? And how many times a day do you go to Amazon or something similar? Versus how many times a day do you go to the Devox app when you are not at the Devox conference? So the Devox conference app is useful in a very specific like for while we're here. And it probably sits on your phone until you're at the next Devox conference, because people don't uninstall apps, which is great for app developers, right? But they don't return. However, Amazon users come back because why? We've got Amazon sending notifications via email, via notification bar, via text message, via product that shows up at your house, via all sorts of things that remind you that Amazon exists outside of the one purchase that you make. So the more things that you can do that have nothing to do with the app, the better that you can do. So user experience does not stop at your application. And a good example of this is Apple. How many of you have a Mac or an iPhone or some kind of Apple product? Okay. How many of you have the box still for the Apple product? Yeah. All right. How many of you have an Android phone? How many of you have the box for it? Not about half as many. So, like, Apple creates products that are an experience. And that goes beyond the application. So a good UI helps people find information quickly. So just like in that second step, after you've gotten them in, the first thing that they're going to do is search. It doesn't matter what you are. The first thing you're going to do is search. Like the Devox app. What do we do in it? We're searching for the app we want to go to. We're searching for the room that we're looking for. We're searching. No matter what we are. If it's Google, we're searching. So every app, we're looking for information quickly. So, like, the apps that, I mean, everybody basically has been copying Tinder for so long because it's so good. Like, the simple swipe that they patented and now everybody's infringing upon is awesome. And now, like, something simple like Facebook's like press to get other things, that is genius because it allows you to not have to navigate around to different screens. So anything you can do like that makes people happier. And things like this, where you can swipe left and right, which allows people to have a better user experience without having to click on a different screen, especially on the mobile app. These are things that surprise and delight users and give them a better experience. So, but the most important thing to remember is that, like, no matter what you do, people are not going to read the instructional text that you put in. So, like, all those walkthrough videos that we do, all those, like, pop-up hints that we put there, they're great stopgap measures. But if we have to be explaining how to use our software, we've failed as developers. And most of the time, we do have to, for the first version or so. We do have to explain it. But if you can't hand it to a 3-year-old and have them be able to figure it out, then it sucks. I mean, it really does. And I'm just telling you that honestly because I had to go through so many iterations of Evernote before it was able to be figured out easily by people. So like I'm one of the founding employees of Evernote. I forgot to mention that before. And we had so many versions of that before it was instantly workable by people other than German researchers, scientists. So once we got it to a point where you could just go in and start typing and people knew what it was, then we knew we had something. Fonts are so important. And we don't even pay attention because a lot of us aren't designers. I mean, aren't designers because we're developers. So I can tell you how many arguments I've gotten into with marketing people about why it needs to be Open Sans 43 in this particular color. I see people laughing because they've gotten into these arguments too. And like why it's this many pixels off and stuff like that. Because I don't see it. I honestly don't see why it matters so much. But I can tell you that when we had went from a 4-star rating to a 2-star rating in the App Store for one Evernote version because our colors were wrong and our fonts had changed, that was a business case that I suddenly cared about. Because people actually do have reading difficulties that aren't going to come through in a reading accessibility funnel. So if you're using those things to say, oh yes, it's fine, it's not fine. So pay attention to what fonts you're using. Now we're going to do a little test here. I want you to read this just pay attention to see how fast it takes you to read this. Like usually it takes people around 10 seconds or so to read through this. Now, this. So which one did you think was easier to read? This one or this one? Second? Yeah, most people say the second one because it's left justified. Anyone recognize what that is? Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, yeah. So, like, justification, like, even though I personally think the center is prettier, like, it's easier to read if it's left justified. So that's a thing. Like, you actually have to pay attention to justification. And then font colors are important. Like, you actually have to pay attention. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm American. Yes. And I went to Cambridge, too. I used the wrong one. So the color is important. The spelling is important. That is true. Like, so you do have to pay attention to what language that you're using. So, and the background color and image. So, like, believe it or not, like I actually, before doing this talk, ran this entire slide deck through an accessibility a test to make sure that all of these fonts were legible, and I purposely did it on white backgrounds just to be as just to make the point come home. So user satisfaction and the responsiveness of your app go hand in hand. Does anybody understand what I'm saying here on that? Like, the faster your application runs, the less likely people are going to complain about it. The faster it is, the more likely they're going to use it. And you're not going to hear people complain. What you're going to notice is they don't get past the adoption phase. They just stop at the first phase and they never get to the use phase. Because if they can't log in, or their searching is slow, or something like that happens that just annoys them at the front, then they never get far enough into the app to see how amazing all your screens and pretty and everything it is. So you need to make sure that you pay more attention to responsiveness in the beginning than all of the wonderful features that you want to build in. So how to be responsive? Do as little as possible. Like, when you're starting out, when you're in that adoption phase, when you're trying to grow your app, put as few features as possible in, because then you're going to have as little server load as possible, as little load on the phone. So you won't have so many SDKs, I mean, any libraries written. The smaller your phone app is, the smaller your app in general is, even if it's just running on the browser, the faster it will load for everyone. Think about the worst case scenario, that you've got somebody that's actually like on an iPhone 3 on iOS that's jailbroken in Korea on vacation. Like, even though you don't support it, and your customer service answer would be like, sorry, we don't support that phone, there'll still be a customer out there saying, that app sucks. And you don't want that, especially when you're starting out. So use as little as possible. So if you're running 20 API calls, that's going to take a ton of time. So you want to make sure that you are as feature light as possible when you are on a mobile application, or that you're doing as much internally as you can and you're not relying on anything external. So the way that this is perceived externally. Now, you can be doing stuff, but you do need to show people that you're doing something. So showing busy indicators is good. So like, I happen to like this one. I don't know if anybody uses anything fun for their busy indicators, but you can always show just some kind of loading thing that you're there. And then progress bars, if it's a long thing. Now, there's actually been a study that shows that it doesn't matter what the progress bar says. People actually feel comforted just by seeing a progress bar. And it doesn't have to be accurate at all. So you can have a progress bar that says 40% complete of a survey or something, and it doesn't have to have any bearing on reality. But it just, as long as there's some kind of progress bar that they know that is there, then they're happy. So some way that you can help, again, with responsiveness is by loading the important information that you know that they need to see first. So how do we know what that is? So for example, if it is Facebook, what do they load first? The feed. So they load the types of the things that your friends have said first at the top, and then they load the rest of the page. And obviously Facebook is really fast, so you see most of that very quickly. But in other apps, for example, for the DevOps app, what does it load first? What does it know you want? It's going to load the conference sessions right away. And then it backloads the information as soon as you click on the session. So these are the ways that you know that you can start loading information. And then if you are able to do a compute on what you think people are going to ask, then it also helps as well. So based on, you can start to do a little bit of not machine learning, but just figure out what kinds of questions people are going to ask, and then you'll be able to answer those ahead of time. And this is where a lot of people get stuck, because they start, like if you have a server queue where it's the same question asked over and over, like so somebody hit the button and was like reload, 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 and you've got all of that going to the server and they're trying to reload, then they can end up crashing your server if you're a really bad developer, which when you're creating your new app, almost everybody is, because you're not putting in the right checks and balances on things. Now, if you do things by priority and you allow the system to say that this is actually something that we should care about, like doing a search on this page versus having somebody change their password should matter more than doing another search, then you can actually weigh things in better. And then you start to actually build some machine learning models into there. But here's where you actually have to care about what kinds of predictions to make. And this is where you start to get into predictive models for your app, even at a small scale. Because you know what kinds of tasks people are going to want to do. When you're starting your app, before you've even started to code, you're going to know what kinds of things you're expecting people to do. So design for that. A good example of that is Netflix. So what do you think that Netflix expects people to do when they go in? They expect people to watch movies. So they've designed it so that you can go in and find a movie. Spotify is a perfect example of this as well. They expect you to go in and play music. So they've designed it so that you go in and you can just hit a button and it plays music. You don't even have to search in Spotify anymore. In Netflix, you have to search. So it just, depending on the application you're developing and what your particular goals are, you'll be able to design it that way. So the reason that Netflix forces you to search is because they're actually collecting data on the movies. They're trying to create a catalog of what people like and don't like about those movies, whereas Spotify already has a catalog of information about the music, so they already know. Now, in order to make those common tasks for people easier, you want to make sure that you're making them do as little as possible. And this gets more into the anticipating their movements. So you want to have defaults in your application that are as sensible as possible. So for example, provide canned solutions, templates. So the more templates that you can add into your system that will pre-fill in information for people, the happier they will be, because the more time is saved. And people are always happier to correct something that's already filled in than to fill in something that's empty. If you think about it, how many times have you corrected an incorrect email address in a field, or corrected your old phone number from a form, as opposed to been given a form that was empty and just been like, I don't want to fill that out? You're more likely to correct the information if it's wrong than to actually fill out a blank form. And giving people wizards that step them through filling out long forms so that they, again, have a progress bar is much better. Now, the customization is another way to make people more likely to fill things out, because if they are able to see things in their own colors, see things with their own style sheet, or even have their own face in it in the top looking back at them, that allows them to be more happy about doing things. And it all comes back to a better customer experience. So, but again, before developing anything, ask how many users are going to need the thing that you want to design. Because if you have a class of one person, then it is not useful to design. And if the thing you want to design is only going to be used like once a month or once a year, like how many times do people want to change passwords? Well, obviously we need to have a change password feature, but we don't need to put it up front and center because it's not going to be used very often, so it doesn't need to be on the front page. You can hide change password very far down in a menu because it's not an everyday kind of thing. So in Spotify, you actually have to go 8 screens in before you can find where the change password screen is. So in order to create an optimal UI, you have to think about it. You have to think about how many users are going to use this and how often. But in the Spotify case, the thing that most users will do is come in, play music. So when you think about it that way, what is the thing that people need to do with your app? And that needs to be front and center, and nothing else does, because everything else is going to bog down your app. So things that have high usage need to be right up front and center. Again, with Spotify, it's just a big old button of play. They have 6 pre-created music playlists that they're AI generated for you. And then at the bottom, if you don't want that, they also have more playlists that have been generated for you. And way at the bottom, you can then go to other things that you might want to create yourself. So it's obvious that they are trying to make it as easy as possible for you to not have to do a thing. So the things that you know that users aren't going to use, or that you presume that users aren't going to use, you can put on another screen. Now, the frequently used features should have as few clicks as possible. And by that, just like I said, with Spotify again, just you go in, it automatically starts playing music, and it's playing that first playlist. If you want to create something like Facebook, where you go in, it's automatically loading your feed, and you see the top information that you can then start scrolling down with very little interaction. So think about the things that you already know are the top apps in the world. There is a list of the top ones that people are already using. You can steal from them the types of things that you know that people already like. And Steve Jobs did it all the time. But there's a reason why those are working so well. It's because people actually think in that way. But remember that people are okay with clicking around more and searching more if it's something that they don't use all the time, like changing a password. Now, you don't want to have every single one of your screens be a different color, or your font's all crazy, or just in general, like even your marketing materials. You don't want your marketing materials to have a completely different color scheme than your apps do. Now, we ran into that problem with Evernote for a bit because our original version, which was made for those German researchers, was one color and one color scheme. And we decided that we wanted to keep that way because that was what they were used to. But everything else we created was like new and clean and flat UI and had a completely different look. And so, but all of our marketing materials was geared towards the new stuff. So we alienated our original users completely by every email we sent out. There weren't that many of them, but they were still very angry with us. The more consistent that you are, the better you have at keeping your users. Like when we started sending out that marketing push, we had 5,000 very angry people on our hands, and they were vocal about it. They were extremely vocal. They flooded our customer service team for a long time about like what's going on, like why am I being spammed? There's entire memes on the internet about Evernote spam emails because people had no idea what was going on. So you have to be extremely careful and make sure that you are consistent in your messaging. So you have to make sure that your objects and actions analysis like finds the common tasks. And I mean, I know I'm saying this over and over again, but make sure that you're doing a model constantly to see if you were right, if your predictions were correct about what things people wanted to do. Because as you're learning more, you're gathering more data about what people are using in an app, then you can change it. Because if you were wrong, if people really wanted to create their own playlists for Spotify, then they would know that. They'd see that people are clicking to that second screen, and then they would be able to put that back more prominently. But as there's like, I'm guessing that because it's become more prominent, all of the AI generated playlists, that what they're seeing instead is that people are happier with that. So all of the consistency that you're creating in your app needs to be focused on the user. In order to create better design, then you need to focus that on the user's case, always, not on the business case. Now, why would you be thinking that way? Because the user case here is the business case. If you can't get them past the adoption phase, if you can't get them past the use phase, then you will never get them all the way to the return phase. So your business case, your only way to make money is to make sure that you're paying attention to that user. Now, we as designers and developers automatically assume that our customers know what we thought when we created the app. Like, we are all guilty of this. I don't even need to ask you to raise hands on that, but we think automatically that when we design something that people will perceive it the way that we designed it. And that's simply not the case. Just try explaining what you had for breakfast to somebody that doesn't speak your language, and you'll run into the same kind of problem. But when working on a project for a long time, we get it in our head what the thing is supposed to do. And then when it comes out into the wild, other people either don't see it that way, or they find a completely different use case for it than we ever thought of. Or worse, they just don't understand it at all. So then we end up at loggerheads because we try and explain to them, well, this is what it's supposed to do. Can't you see that? I don't understand why you don't understand this thing. And then we create really terrible YouTube videos trying to explain, click here, click here, click here, and there. And there's really, really terrible explanation videos of all sorts of apps on the web. Silicon Valley made a great episode all about when you try to explain your app to people that don't understand it. And the thing is, users only understand what's on the screen. They only understand what is directly in front of them. So if you have crammed too much stuff on there, go back to number 1 of people don't read. If you have buried the most important feature, then it's on the wrong screen. And if it's not prominent enough, then you need to make it bigger. But you should never have to explain what your app does. So here's where it gets into a little bit of trouble. So we've all probably run into this, where we're explaining our requirements to someone, or our requirements are being explained to us, and then we get it wrong when we thought we got it right, because somebody told us that, like, okay, so we need to do exactly this, and then, and we're sure, right? This is exactly what you want, and then, wait, it wasn't what we wanted. It wasn't what we wanted at all. You got it totally wrong. But you were right and wrong at the same time. So this is what happens when you're ambiguous with your requirements. So you need to avoid the different kinds of ambiguity. So textual ambiguity is one thing. So for example, like this is a sign that actually exists. So it's textually ambiguous because which way am I supposed to go? It's only all of them, so I'm not entirely sure if I'm on the road, where am I supposed to go? These are also examples of textual ambiguity, because I could read these in many different ways, depending on how I felt that day. My personal favorite is the deer killing 17,000 people. That seems fun. I'd love to see those deer. Yeah, there's so many of these out there that like you just accidentally do those. So when you're writing notifications in your application, you can be accidentally ambiguous just by missing a comma or something. Now, graphical ambiguity happens a lot as well, especially if we're dealing with fonts and icons and things that have lower pixel resolutions. One of my personal favorites is this. I actually did run into this. I mean, it was a joke in Scotland, but I really did see it on a bathroom, so there was that. So what you need to do is think outside in. I mean, first you were thinking inside out, right? But now you got to think outside in. So start thinking as the customer. Make sure that it makes sense to people that don't know anything about you or your app or what you tried to design, because users are not stupid. Like, as much as we think they are, especially with the bugs that they give us and all of the use cases they come up with that we never thought of, that's exactly the point. They come up with a whole bunch of use cases for things that we never thought of. And if that means that there are things out there that might be outside of our knowledge. So if we don't have access to users to test things with, then we need to go get them. And there's sites that exist like that, like usertesting.com, which is awesome. But you can usually just put your app in somebody's hands and say, like, hey, can you just tell me what you think of this? And especially if you don't tell them that it's your app, you get really good results on that. Because people are not likely to give you honest answers if you tell them that it's yours. But provide a low-risk environment when you're testing things out, because people are going to make mistakes. So I always run through betas and alphas when I am creating new things, because you're going to have mistakes. And don't create anything ever that doesn't allow you to correct mistakes. Because if you've got something that has like a 3-year release period, and once you've got that milestone done, it's untouchable ever again, then you're doing something crazy wrong. And don't make it costly to correct those mistakes. Because, again, if you can't ever correct the things that you made wrong, then there's no point in development. I mean, I'm all about lean and agile development, so you should be able to have milestones that you're quickly iterating on fixing things. And please, please, please have an undo button for your users. No matter what you are creating, they should be able to undo whatever they've done. So when you are creating these things, you want to mitigate the risk as much as possible. So because a low-risk situation for your users and for your developers is going to reduce the amount of stress and, again, get you back through that adoption cycle. A user that wants to explore your app is a good thing. A security researcher that wants to explore your app is a very good thing. So anyone that's worried about security researchers, don't. They're excellent allies to have. So one thing to start thinking about is making sure that any messages that you put in your app, any notifications, are as visible as possible and as easy to deal with as possible. So think about it this way, like software needs to focus the attention on what's most important, and anything else can be by the wayside. So like with the simple question, like is my boss in the office? Yes or no? Like yes or no. So like things that you could do, for example, are like you could send your boss an email and find out. You could call them on the phone. You could visit the website to see if they've checked in today. You could knock on the wall. Like you could do all these things, but all you need to know is yes or no, is my boss in the office? And like if your app isn't giving them the data that they need, because they don't care about how it got there. They don't care about how they find out. All they need to know is the answer, because they need to know if they need to put their tie back on, you know? So make sure that you are matching the medium that you're presenting your app on. So if it fits on iPhone, like iPhone apps look a certain way. Android apps look a certain way. They don't necessarily look the same because the way the menus act are different. Desktop apps and web apps look differently. Now, you want to be consistent, again, for your own brand across cross-platform. However, you want to match the way that those things work and take advantage of what they can do. For example, if you're on iPhone, you can take advantage of Siri. And if you're on Android, you can take care of, you can use Google's, I can't remember what, Google's Assistant, yes. They keep changing the name of it. So like being able to use the tools that you have available allows you to develop better. Now, there's two different kinds of UI design that these fall under, that everything that I've talked to has fallen under. Now, participatory design is when you're actually working with customers to create better products. This is like Netflix is doing. Netflix uses participatory design because they're actually taking your basically thumbs up, thumbs down data to manually, with some algorithms, of course, but they're using this to create a better model of database for themselves. They're also doing a lot of focus groups, but they know what better to ask. They know what better to offer you as customers because you're participating in their service. The disadvantage to this is there's an increased cost to them because they're constantly purchasing new things hoping that it's going to hit with you, because they don't know ahead of time if things are going to work. So there's a lot of things that end up in Netflix because they think that it might work, but they're not sure. Anticipatory design, on the other hand, is almost all done by machine learning. You're not talking to users almost ever, and you are using a large amount of data that you already have to create a predictive model on what you think they will want and presenting that to them. So this is what Spotify is doing. They already had a database of what the person like you would most likely want based on your friends' preferences, your personality type, and a database of songs that they already had. So they are now creating things. I mean, it's a lot more complicated than that, but they're weighting things together with a machine learning model to then create trends playlists to then suggest to you. And their machine learning model then learns further over time your likes, but they have something that they can start with each personal user. So this is anticipating your needs and serving you well. Now, you need to have a large data set in order to use anticipatory design, but you don't have to actually start out with like being a Target or somebody like that. You don't have to be Lloyd's of London with like years and years and years of bank data for that. You can actually purchase data sets in order to do that. And as long as the people, and it doesn't have to be PII, it doesn't have to be personally identifiable information, you can actually, there are data sets that are GDPR compliant that you can buy to create models to train to then offer. So just to recap, in order to create good UI that is allowing applications that are in the ballpark of making people more able to use them in a faster, more effective, happier way, you need to make these tasks easier for them to access. And then you need to be as consistent as possible. No matter what you're developing, be consistent. Then anticipate their needs. And that's really where it comes in, that we're taking tasks away from them. No matter what we're designing, whether we're using machine learning models or not, good UI removes choice. Good UI just puts the most important things right in the hand of the customer. And some of it is voice controlled. Some of it won't even be using gestures anymore. Downstairs, you can control the bridge of the enterprise with your voice. And that is amazing UI. I don't know if you've tried it, but you must before you're done. There should be a queue right after this talk. But by being able to do things like that, the UIs that you can create are amazing. And make that information easy to find. Because no matter what you're looking for, the user needs to be able to get to it quickly and easily. And lastly, get participation from your users. This is super important, because even if you're in an anticipatory model, you still are going to need them to opt in to get them past the adoption phase. If they don't sign up, then you have no product. So we have a few minutes for questions, and I'm happy to take any. Anyone? Yes?
You mentioned at the beginning that the fourth step of the design was bringing your users back. I just wanted your thoughts on the ethics behind user interruptions and the addiction behind them.
So he's asked about user interruptions and the ethics in that. There's a lot of studies that have shown that we have become more addicted to our applications and our phones and devices than any other addiction that has ever happened, ever. So I think there's a way to create micro moments and in an ethical way. So if we do, I think people have something like 150 times a day that they check their phone. So as long as we are not forcing them to go over that, most people now are actually ignoring notifications. They're turning notifications off because there's notification overload. So there just needs to be a way that you are doing this in a ethical, nice, gentle way that fits with your app. So Headspace does this very well. Once a day they send an SMS and an app notification to your phone that reminds you that you had set a goal and it's time for you to come in and check it. So it needs to make sense for your app, not like Instagram where you get a notification every time somebody follows you or something like that. So you just have to make sure that it makes sense to the values of your application. Anyone else? No? Okay. Well, thank you for coming, and enjoy the rest of DevBox.